to the Center for Medical Justice. My name is Dr. Joseph Parker, and today I'll be interviewing Dr. Norman Clement, who's both a pharmacist and a dentist. Dr. Clement, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Well, I'm originally from Detroit. My parents, let's say my parents are folks who came to this country from Panama. They were both from Panama, and they arrived in 1951, and then 30 days later, I was born. And so uh, I had five brothers, and we were. It was culturally different for them when they came to this country. So my father and mother both spoke Spanish. My father more than my mother, and they were part of a family. They're both on both sides came from Barbados, and they were brought to Panama. I would say, yeah, brought to Panama by the United States government with agreement with Britain to build the Panama Canal.
Oh,
And my father, grandfather, Norman L. Clement, was one of the workers on the Panama Canal that you worked with,
wow.
and they stayed into Panama. And in that zone called the Canal Zone, that was the American Control Zone. And he was born in 1917. And my mother was also in another part of the Canal Zone, and her father worked on the canal. And it was not until maybe a year ago I found out that he had gotten killed. I knew he had died, but I found out he was killed in an explosion as part of the dredging of the canal. Because if you look at that canal, it had to be dredged, and he was blown to bits. I found out through one of my relatives that what had happened to him, and so he died when my mother was maybe about 13 or 14 and stuff. But the interesting thing is my father went on and they met and came to this country and made a go at it, and they did pretty good. My father was a carpenter, and he made a go at it, and he worked for the city of Detroit and did quite, worked as I think as part of engineering group that did inspections and stuff. And my father lived till he was 104, and he played
Wow.
golf, and he was all my parents. They read a lot. They taught us a lot about the world. My parents had seen, because they were in Panama, and they had seen every battleship and every
Yeah.
whatever came through the canal for World War Two
World War
and
II,
stuff.
right, right. I
Yeah,
don't think
and
a lot of people understand the human cost of that canal, not just
oh
through
God,
accidents, which was tremendous, but also through
right,
malaria, which we had not yet controlled,
right,
yellow
and
fever, and everything else you
yeah.
faced back then.
When I went to Panama, I was just amazed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing that they'd gone through this jungle. But the most interesting thing was there was a cemetery, and there was a place, a hill, and they said this is where they used to have a conveyor belt, bring the bodies, and they would jump in this. It's called Mount Hope, Good Hope Cemetery, but beautiful in Cologne at the time. So they had a pretty good agent. But the interesting thing was is they were in an American zone, and the American zone, unfortunately, was I would call it apartheid. I mean, that flag, wherever that flag flew, the American philosophy flew. And at that time, they called it Jim Crow or segregation. So there was a separation. And in Panama, even though they were uh, Barbadian citizens, British citizens. They became Panamanian citizens, and and they were had separate. They called it the gold and silver system. So they went through that, and they were not even American citizens. So, and then my uncles, and them all worked for the canal. But the one interesting thing was they all had Social Security numbers when Social Security came around, Medicare, they had that stuff too. So they immigrated to this country later on, years later.
I
I
see.
was growing, and my parents believed in education, and so I went to school at Florida A&M University first, and I graduated in pharmacy, And then I was always interested in medicine, and I went to the University of Michigan. I got intrigued with dentistry, and a friend of mine was in it, and I went to the University of Michigan, and I got one of the finest educations I would say in the world, even though it was torturous. I mean, but it was highly and the discipline taught us about research and those sort of things. And then later on, I practiced dentistry in Tallahassee, Florida. Came to Florida, and we were doing fine. And then I got targeted, Medicaid fraud.
So how long had you practiced before this targeting occurred?
About 4 years, and it came. It's interesting how it happened that we it, it was came. I was doing excessive dental procedures. Okay, this is before I understood understanding of data analytics. And what was excessive was dental disease. Here you had all these little kids, and I saw the Medicaid program. Not much, but I saw enough of it to see that it was a horrendous problem. Right. You know, there was no fluoride in water. We then fixed the water. Then couldn't get paid, so we went and they showed us how to get paid. You know, you had to put everything in one day, all on one sheet. They told us what to do. We did that, and I remember I had a guy came in. His kid was 19. I did some work, and the mother said, "Well, there's a problem with his Medicaid." Because says he's 3. I said, "This kid's not 3." So I went down to the Medicaid office. This is before internet and all that stuff. Right. And we got it straightened out. Okay, got it straightened out. And then 3 years later, I got indicted for billing for a 3-year-old doing adult procedures and being a fraud and that sort of thing. And then I got indicted for being excessive in my dental procedures. And at that time, you know, I never had any problem with law enforcement, but that's when I saw the rigmarole. I saw that people, the games that were being played, that you were assumed guilty without even a hearing or anything like that. We just automatically were guilty, and they wanted me to plead, and I wanted to fight. But again, it was before the internet, and then I realized that my research thing took in because this indictment didn't make any sense. So I wrote it up, and I sent off I wrote it up and I sent it to a magazine called, or our journal called the Journal of Pediatric Dentistry. Mm-hmm. And suddenly it came published. I said, wow. So I did that. And then we created an organization called Dental Survey of America. By that time, I was out of money, had a force to take this plea, and I went through the rigmarole. And then I started hearing from people all over the country that had experienced the same thing. I didn't realize how bad it was.
So what were they doing? Were they criminalizing clerical errors, or were they just criminalizing their own errors, like in Dr. Rafai? What was their main complaint?
Well, their main complaint, first, it was they were excessive and doing dental procedures or medical procedures.
How were they trying to prove that? Were they saying that that procedures weren't done, or the patient didn't need the procedure? Or
yes, patients didn't need the procedures and data. And it turns out years later, I worked with years later, when Dr. Anand and I came in and said, listen, this thing is about data analytics. And my brother had mentioned it. I says, well, what are you talking about? He says, listen, how could someone say that you are excessive in procedure? What measurement are they using? They're using data. And they're also saying you compare to this doctor and that doctor. Well, it turns out that at that time in the South, you know, when little kids would come in, particularly poor kids, particularly black children would come in, okay? Mm-hmm. All they did was just take out their teeth. Right. They didn't do dental work. They didn't do there was assessed value on something. So when I'm here, graduate of Michigan, and I said, whoa, I had never seen, you know, I had pediatric dentistry training, and I would, you know, restore these teeth and tell the mothers about this. And these kids had periodontal disease, and I tell them about, you know, periodontal disease and stuff. And it came that, well, you don't do that kind of stuff in general dentistry, you know. And as it turned, see, when we were in Michigan, we were trained to do this. It was a
Their argument
highly
was that you should have just yanked the teeth out and
e-
not tried to fix them, and it would have saved the
exactly.
government money. Therefore, the
Yeah.
kids really don't
And
need teeth, and so
another
that's
trick they
basically
did
their
was
argument. I see. I see.
another trick was we bill for patients on a day that we didn't see them or something. And what it was is that they had told, remember, we had a difficult time getting paid.
Uh-huh.
So they told us you need to put everything when you put your final bill, you put it all on the same date, same line, and we send it all at once.
So
And I
they
said, well,
told
we
you to
didn't
do
do
it
it.
as
I
a
said, well, we
batch.
didn't order it. He said, no, you have to do it like this. And we did get paid. I got indicted for seeing billing every procedure on the very same day.
I see.
So it
I see.
it
So,
was
so you got one part telling you to do something and
exactly.
another part prosecuting you for doing it. So let me draw a parallel. That's like
Mhm.
right now in continuing medical education, they're telling doctors don't fire patients with a bad drug screen because you're putting them at high risk. When I say bad, with an unexpected
Yeah,
result on the drug screen, they're saying you're putting them at high risk of addiction and death. So they say don't fire them, get them back on track, give them another chance, work with them. And that's what they're saying at the state level, DHHS, CDC, and even parts of the DEA. But the
right.
enforcement division of the DEA is saying if they have one unexpected drug screen and you don't fire them, we can prosecute you. And then they will select who they do and don't prosecute. And so it's a selective prosecution. And sometimes, of
And
course, they will come after you twice, which I believe is a malicious prosecution. Is that what happened to you?
well, what happened to me was that they just prosecuted me, and I had to eventually. I lost my practice and stuff. But what was interesting was is that the guys around who also got indicted in various places, all of us had one thing that was unique about all of our practices. We all had SBA loans from the SBA,
Gotcha.
and all the guys got indicted. And I remember I found out about 2 years later, about maybe about 2 or 3 years later, one of the SBA guys who believed in what we were saying called me and said, "Hey, you got another brother that's having some problems." And this was a guy named Bankhead. He looked like a guy. He's just and I said, he gave me the name, and I called it. That was a guy named Fred Williams, and they were prosecuting him for $300 of overbilling. And eventually, he did a year in prison. Okay, and then he came out. And fast forward, and they indicted him again. This time for DEA, the Medicaid. I mean, for billing for calling him a drug dealer in a white coat. And eventually he died in prison. He was served 30 years, but he did maybe, but got lasted 2 years because he died of colon cancer.
Oh, he was sentenced to 30 years?
30 years. His name was Freddie Williams. You can pull this case up. And he went to Buckner. And like I said, he lasted about 2 years. And then he had colon cancer when he left. And they took him to prison. So this is 19, so he died in 2006.
2006. It was Freddie Williams.
Freddie Williams. Freddie Williams. He was a pain specialist. He's one of the first of these highly trained pain specialists and stuff. And
I've found that they give no deference to any specialty training.
mhm.
Dr. Ruan, who just got resentenced to the same 20 years that he had started with, despite the Supreme Court saying he had been wrongfully convicted of several charges. Um, he he had 7 board certifications, making him the most highly trained physician in the history of the United States. Do you think sometimes they choose someone who is obviously knows what they're doing, obviously not trying to break the law, and crushes that person as a warning or example to everyone else? Because if you only take out the truly criminal physicians, you can't direct or dictate the practice of medicine. You don't influence it as much. If you start hammering what to most doctors would appear to be clearly innocent people for prescribing opiates, you can dramatically reduce the amount of opiate prescribing, which seems to be their goal, and that's what they've accomplished.
It's a fear factor game. He is an easy. What I began to realize is that they didn't train us in dental school or even pharmacy school in about law. And you kind of you run into it. And when you try to tell and the sad part is when you try to tell folks that we did everything correctly. I did it by the book. When you start getting into literature and stuff, and they said, well, you must have done something wrong, And that's the way it is. And so that's what caused us to create at that time was the organization Dental Survey of America. And that information, we eventually ended up in Washington, D.C. And it happens that while I lived in Detroit, my neighbor was John Conyers, okay? And I had at that time, and another friend of mine, we knew John Conyers, and he was on the Judiciary Committee. And what happens is you go to Washington, and I had to go to another con, which was Henry Waxman's office. And the guy says, well, what we need to do here, and he kind of believed me, and he says, what we need to do is you need to write something out. This is before internet and all that stuff. And he says, you write it out and publish it. And that's what we did. And I had already published something, but then a group of us got together and we published like about 5 articles. Then he says, when you publish these articles, then get back with us and then we can have a meeting. And that's exactly what he did. And so Waxman at the time, then he says, you're from Detroit. And see, what they do is they go to the congressman in that area. And they said, this guy? And it happens that the guy who was his chief of staff went to high school with me. He said, I know Norm. Yeah. What are you talking about? He's credible. Yeah, I know Daryl, these Williams. Oh man, these guys. And then things start moving forward. Another thing that helped us was the congressman, I think it was Louis Stokes. His chief of staff was a head, also part-time work with the National Dental Association. And she had heard these complaints. And she then began to put together, and so when we got back, this whole group of people in this meeting, and what they did was, and I always remember it was December 21st, because that's when we got out of the meeting, that's when that plane crashed, that Pan American plane was blown up and stuff. I always remember that. But the thing that was interesting was they came and says, okay, we're going to investigate this. We're going to not put your name on it. But what we're going to do is we're going to send it to the Office of Technology and Assessment. That was was the research arm of Congress and the Senate.
Right.
And on there was Kennedy, Waxman, Dingell, all these big, powerful guys. And so they sent it there, and a woman was named Pam Simley. They did the investigation. And they says, what we will do is all your work will go into the congressional record. And that's the key. Everything goes in the congressional record. And so when they came back a year later, it supported our findings and stuff. Unfortunately, what happens is there was these, the election took place maybe about a couple months later. It was a contract on America, with America, and they turned and shut down the Office of Technology and Assessment, closed that up.
I remember when that happened. That was a sad day.
Tragic thing that ever happened, because with technology and assessment, it gave the Congress the information as to anything. For example, the BP oil spill. We knew that there was a problem with these valves and these equipment. Equipment they were buying from the Air Force that caused jet aircraft or the planes, especially the rotary, that plane that
the B-1 bomber and the Osprey.
Osprey were serious defects. They began to look at this Office of Technology Assessment, look at this stuff is fraud, there's defects here that have been not reported.
Right.
When they eliminated that, what happens is that all of the information to the Congress is from these private vendors.
That's right.
So right now, Congress is completely blind
That's true.
as to a completely blind. So you get the one guy saying one thing, and this is the same thing happened with the so-called opioid mislabeled crisis, which you can almost tell that the word opioid is a mislabeled thing because opioids are the synthetics, opiates are codeine, morphine, noscarpine,
Right. The
papaverine,
natural
and
derivatives of opium.
all of the derivatives of of the opium plant. So
Right.
when you say opioid, you say, well, something didn't make any sense at first and stuff. But then if they had the Office of Technology Assessment, they would have been able to determine that this group prop,
Well,
the way they were going.
they lost an objective source of information that they could send out that was only beholding to scientific truth and the education of Congress.
Exactly.
Now you've got they don't know who to listen to. And I'll give you a good example.
Yes,
Are
sir.
you familiar with the case in Massachusetts where an addiction psychiatrist convinced a lawmaker to propose a law that said that if a physician prescribed any opioid and at any time in that patient's life they ever developed an opiate addiction, that the physician who prescribed that first dose would be required to pay for their first 60 days, I believe it was, of inpatient treatment. Have you heard of that?
I'm vaguely familiar
It
with
got
it,
shot
but
down.
again,
It
yes,
got
sir.
shot down.
Vaguely
But
familiar.
that's what happens when you have a legislator listening to one biased source of information.
Right.
Of course, if you have a family member who's been an
Hmm.
abusive drunk or has died from alcoholism, you might be in favor of banning alcohol and you might
Right.
be able to make a pretty good argument,
Right.
but that doesn't mean there's not a counter argument that needs to be made also. And now,
Absolutely.
without the Office of Technology Assessment, we have no unbiased counter argument.
Right.
So do you
And it
think?
has seriously wounded this country
Oh
in
yes, oh yes, I
every
agree. I agree with
aspect
that entirely.
of thing. And the thing about it, remember, technology was totally different then. It was much smaller, or it wasn't as advanced as it was. Now we're getting into to high speed
Oh, it's impossible now. It's
information,
impossible
a
for
computer.
anyone to
Yeah,
keep up with it nowadays. Even in the Apollo days, you could
right,
kind of understand what was going along, or
right.
what was happening. And I would argue that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, people were relatively more scientifically up to date because they had more STEM in school. And also,
Hmm.
the average person did a little more tinkering with their cars and basically knew how things worked.
Exactly.
These
Yes.
days, you open a hood, I can't even tell you where the alternator is, and
Right.
if they still have one. And people are more divorced from the technology, yet we have, opinion-based decisions instead of
Yeah.
evidence-based decisions. And we'll get to the CDC guidelines and all that. But do you think that practitioners, healthcare providers have a problem accepting that under the government's criteria for prosecuting someone for fraud or overprescribing,
Right.
any physician, any dentist, any pharmacist today could
Mhm.
be arrested and prosecuted and charged?
Absolutely. And he had proper legal representation
Yes,
and
he
who did
had
the
a
proper research on these
yes.
issues. And you
And
see
really
this
that's
all the
key, right?
time.
That's key.
Hmm.
That's
But
key to having a
yeah, right.
chance.
Could be research, yes.
Yeah,
And
a little chance.
right. You see this all the time in these cases here, where you have people who are, as what Russo says, they don't prosecute you on the merit, that they prosecute you based on the media and the intimidation that they can do to wreck you and then force you and financially and wreck you financially, then
Right, right.
force you
And then
into doing a plea agreement, and that's why they're getting these ridiculous statistics, and we got 99%
yeah, 90 nine
conviction
hundred
rate.
ninety six out of 1,000 cases do
Yeah,
not make it to trial.
right,
0.4%, I think,
right,
or accredited trial. Maybe it's 98% don't make it to trial, and of that 2%, a few are dismissed, but for the most
Hmm.
part, they're convicted at trial. Now, I would argue that at trial, they don't convict you by showing you're guilty. They convict you by preventing you from proving that you're innocent. There's a recent case,
Exactly.
Dr. Talbot, where so much evidence was excluded that the
Mhm.
jury basically was funneled to a decision that was inescapable under the limitations of what the court would allow the jury to know.
Exactly.
So the jury
And,
was never told that the man had dementia so bad that he could not contribute to his defense.
right.
So, and there
So,
can be five experts saying that, but if there's one saying he's good to go, that's the one, right? The
mhm.
government and
And
the courts, which are an extension of the government, that they take.
I
Now,
saw
uh-huh,
well,
go ahead.
I saw this the first time when I had the issue back in 1987 and stuff with the where they had this expert, a guy. I always remember this so-called expert then, and the guy was a quack, a
Uh-huh,
complete quack. But because and then other guys complained about him. You know, as I
right.
found out through my writings, people were writing and saying, "Hey, you know, you're after this guy. His name was Kekich. This guy's an absolute quack." And these were the quackadoodles that they brought in, and has been pointed out that will say anything for any dollar. We call them SMGS or subject matter.
Yes,
CS. I
yes.
will leave it
I
alone.
remember the
I
acronym.
got to
Don't
keep
say
this
it.
clean. I got to keep it clean. You
Don't
know,
get me banned on
I got
YouTube.
to make sure we
Yeah,
don't
no,
contaminate. But these guys are the guys who come in and um, um, who are come in and will get paid to pay the line. We see this again in fast forward 30 years later. We have guys that come in and will just the, say anything, and the convictions are based basically on the ignorance. And
yes,
that's not a bad word of the jurors saying,
right,
"Well, he must have done something wrong. He was greedy. He or she
right.
was making all this money.
Well,
He
you start off,
right,
you start off with a presumption of guilt. I don't care what country you're in or what
right,
they say you should start with. There is a feeling, a common emotional feeling that someone would not be brought before a jury if they had not probably done something wrong. And
right.
then you're up against a government willing to pay someone to make statements that are completely contrary to the textbooks, to the medical evidence, to any evidence-based practice.
Mm-hmm,
But they have put him forward as an expert. The courts accept him as an expert, and it is devastating to have them say something and the jury, the jury doesn't know. The jury can be composed of extremely intelligent people, but this is
mm-hmm,
not their area of expertise, and it takes as you know, 4 years of training to even start to have an informed opinion on the practice of medicine or pharmacy or
mm-hmm,
dentistry. And because of that, they just don't know. So I liken it to this. So as an ER doctor, someone comes into the ER shot, and I say, stay right there. I'm going to gather up 12 people. I'm going to randomly select 12 people,
mm-hmm.
off the street. I'm going to bring them in. I'm going to have two experts argue opposing views on what should be done with you. Do you need a thoracotomy? Do you need a chest tube? Do I need to just put a Band-Aid over it and send you home? I'm going to have these two experts argue opposite positions. I'm going to let those 12 people vote, and whatever they say is what I'm going to do to you.
Right.
Right?
It's
We would not do a healthcare system like that because that's not reasonable. Now, in the states are supposed to police the practice of medicine, and that would be the medical boards. Now, of course, they're subject to influence. They're extremely biased against physicians, in my opinion, because their sole duty is to the patient. But at the same time, at least you're arguing with knowledgeable people, and
mm-hmm,
you have a chance. And if you are medically correct, right? So one of the patients I was prosecuted for, the board looked at it and voted to return my license, and that made the
mm-hmm.
DEA, well, to unsuspend it, and that made the DEA furious because I believe they want to dictate the practice of medicine, even though there are laws that say they cannot.
But you cannot, and that's that. But the point, one of the points that I wanted to get to is that what I did in the past in terms of writing then, okay, in this next episode that where we I said we were never going to take any sort of government program. Everyone was going to be cash, and that I'd rather see 5 people a day than 500 people a day with insurance and those sort of things, and Medicaid and stuff. And that's the way we did. And everything, again, by the book. And this time I double checked and triple checked everything. And we had an attorney that his name was, I'll say his name, Dale Siscom. And what he did was he says, I'm going to come by and we'll send somebody by your office, a group, and they're going to look through your office and see anything that you've done wrong. So there'd be no question about it. And he did that. And in fact, he asked me to leave. And he says, leave when this guy comes. So now the staff was there. And this lady came in, she did everything. She found us to be in maybe 1 or 2 areas to be, we had to have someone doing the ordering, someone else, everybody who did ordering of narcotics had to have a separate thing. And we did that. Everything was perfect, okay? But it didn't matter to the DEA. When they came in to my office, to the practice, first thing I knew, don't talk to them. Hey, well, we're here at administrative warrant, and here it is. And I looked at this administrative warrant. I says, well, who's this signed by? So, what are you doing here? So-and-so. Call my attorney up. So-and-so. And I said, listen, I like to comply with you, but you need to leave. Because there's this, I can't respond to administrative warrant. I'm advice my attorney, and such, leave. And they knew, hey, this guy knows the law. Then they came back 5 months later with some, say, well, we got a judge to sign this and such. I says, I'm not letting you in until I get an attorney. Oh, that made him mad. And then when they did come in and the attorney was there, he says, they said, where's this? Now they come down this list. Everything was, where's this record? It's over here. Everything's here. Everything's there. And it burned them up. The thing that I wanted to point out to was when this whole thing finally came down, my attorney says, you can't win. He says, what I need you to do is write. You're a good enough writer. You need to write a blog or something to get people to see what's going on. Put this out in the media. Put this out in the press. And it was that thing that saved us in the sense that we created the You Were Within the Norms blog. And it was that blog that saved us because I was never indicted, never charged with anything. But I remember just being, and that's what saved it. And it's helped a lot of people.
That saved you from criminal prosecution, but did they still administratively inhibit your ability to practice?
Exactly. What they did was they took we went to the administrative hearing, and the first thing that happens, towards the end of the hearing, they came up and said, well, this guy's he's arrogant, he's uppity, and all this kind of stuff. And they found this thing called You're Within the Norms, And the article they pulled was an article that I had written, and I put my name on it. But as it turns out, and I realized then, I said, you know what? I'm going to put everything out here. Just like Cisco said, all the stuff they're trying to hide and from the media. And I'm going to put it all out here. And not only am I going to do that, I'm going to make sure I publish it every week and stuff. And put the videos in there that we interviewed every patient and those and then the police report. My brother happened to be a Detroit police officer, or he was retired from the Detroit Police Department. He was a sergeant, but he was really up there, and he did this type of had 2 master's degrees and was working on a PhD. And he did this synopsis of these warrants, and he showed that the warrants were all defective. And then we some other people had contacted us, and they sent us the warrants and found out the warrants were just simply carbon copies of each one. They were just these standard things, just fill in the blanks or whatever. And so we published it. And it must have set them, whatever it did, it must have set them off, or they really got to got scared because when we exposed that the warrants were all the entire warrant process was defective, and then we went and did an analysis of this so-called these laws, and we got heard from other folks like Richard Lawhorn and those people sent us things saying, well, the DEA can't enforce drug law.
That gets to the Controlled Substances Act.
Right.
Now, some would argue that the Controlled Substances Act gives them the right to certify people for controlled medication prescribing and to take administrative action, but not direct or control the practice of medicine itself, which is prohibited by, I think, 42 USC 1395, as well as multiple Supreme Court rulings. Now, the Supreme Court just made a ruling about administrative courts, basically saying they haven't been doing it right. They've been violating people's rights.
Exactly, the Chevron deference.
Yes.
And that helped us out tremendously. But what was interesting, they had this expert come in, and this guy was from Ohio State. He was a guy who was supposed to be the top expert, one of the top ones, a guy named Don Sullivan. I'll mention his name if it's okay. And I went in and we did the research on this guy's background. We found out this guy had been just wholly discredited, even by administrative courts, and that the analysis that he used was just totally made up, fictitious. So we wrote about it. We wrote 5 articles about it. And what we didn't quite understand, weren't aware of, was that other attorneys were reading this, and they used the information that we had obtained against this guy and totally wrecked his calamity, if you want to call it, his foolishness. And
right. Now, that is a powerful weapon, because it's always a shock, when someone's in court. First, everyone wants to believe it'll only happen to bad doctors, otherwise none of us are safe. And secondly, when you hear them say something ridiculous in court, someone who's supposed to be an expert, or even the DEA says something ridiculous, you're looking around expecting someone to stand up and say, that's not scientifically accurate, but there's no one to do that. You can't do that. And if your lawyer is not a healthcare specialist, they don't know to do that, right?
And exactly. And my lawyer, Mr. Cisco, was very astute to what was going on. But he says we can't win because the whole system is rigged, because the administrative hearing officer can decide what evidence you put into the court, and then they don't want to hear from your patients. They've already had a deference, and all deference, as they call it.
From what I understand, in administrative hearings, it's a lot like going in front of your medical board. You can argue you were right, but they will not be receptive to that, no matter how much objective evidence you have to support it. You have to accept some criticism. You have to put forward a plan to educate yourself in the areas that they want, and then if there is a pathway in an administrative process, if there's some corrective action, you've got to study something, pass a test. I don't have so much a problem with that as I have them taking your career,
your property,
out what I consider due process. Telling someone they need to study more or that they disagree with you, that's fine. They have that position. They have the right to disagree. But these administrative judges in the DEA, these administrative proceedings, they have one goal. They're not objectively based to evaluate scientifically your prescribing. They're there to rubber stamp the opinions of the DEA agents that came to you. How often does that court find that the DEA agents were wrong? I would argue it's that hearing judge. It's not important.
I found one case, the Oak Hill Pharmacy out of West Virginia.
Now I did see that. And yes.
What they did,
an administrative judge that found
it was
that?
an administrative judge, but what they did was right after the hearing, the attorney realized he couldn't win. So he went to the Fourth Circuit, the judge named Judge Goodman, who was a district court judge,
So this
and
went to a court. It went out of
yeah,
the
he went there
administrative
first.
process to a court because I saw that and I
Right,
actually wrote a story about it called the Oak Hill disaster or the
right,
DEA's Oak Hill disaster. This is where they went in and said this pharmacy is filling too many prescriptions for Subutex, which is more prone to diversion than Suboxone. So we're going to say that's criminal and lock them up.
right,
And the district judge said it's a perfectly allowed medication to be prescribed.
right,
It's prescribed to people who are starting on therapy or who can't tolerate naloxone. And there are some people that cannot tolerate naloxone
right.
and,
And
and
what?
because of dysphoria and other stuff. So he said, where's the crime? Now, I would say in 80% of the cases I have evaluated, and I've evaluated hundreds of them now, and about 80% of them I have to ask, where is the crime? A doctor right now just got sentenced to 20 years because a patient of his died from a cocaine and heroin overdose, and he had previously prescribed that patient oxycodone. He did not
Cocaine?
prescribe the heroin. He did
He
not
didn't
prescribe
prescribe him the heroin, did he?
Nope, no heroin, no cocaine.
He did no cocaine.
But
And
he's
this
going
is
to prison for 20 years
20 years.
because they said the patient had a bad drug screen and you should have known to stop his treatment, which is exactly what would have put the guy on the street looking for drugs.
Exactly. And here was the thing that really, when my brother did the evaluation, in fact, right after uh, they came in and raided my pharmacy, it was August 29, 2019. A week later, I sent this stuff to him, and he called me, and I was on my way. At that time, I was just getting ready to go to vacation. I was doing a 2-week tour with a group to South Africa. And he calls me, and I was in, I think it was the Netherlands, and he says, well, Nor, he says, well, what did you do wrong? Almost like what you said. And I says, well, I don't know. He said, I did this. He says, Norm, it's except as authorized. You're authorized to give this. You can't charge somebody with an El Chapo crime when you've got a license. You are a licensed pharmacist. How could they get away with this? And when we published that language into You're Within the Norms and sent it out, all of a sudden, I mean, it just their virulence, as you could say, that seemed to stop. They were like, well, what do we do about that? And then shortly after that, the Wuhan folks, the folks representing Wuhan, I don't know if they picked up on it or what, but then they began to write their little their briefs, and as this thing was going through the courts and stuff, and then that was a major thing that they accepted. The 841 accept is authorized, and fortunately, the Supreme Court saw it the same way. Saw it the same way too.
The DEA is interpreting accept as authorized to mean accept as authorized by them.
Them, right.
And then there was, they don't have the right to interpret the practice of medicine or dictate it, and that the definite, but what they have the right to do and what they have the power to do are two different things. What would you say is the most important lesson to impart to someone listening? Someone is watching this just to see what's going on. They may or may not believe it's possible to be targeted when you're innocent. I would say most doctors know that now because they're all 250,000 have quit in the last couple of years. And a huge number are saying, I'm not prescribing anything controlled because it's either not safe or the rules are so confusing that it's impossible to follow them without someone being able to lock you up. What would you say is the most important?
The most important thing to me was I had a good attorney. It's to fight and to put your information. The way you win these things is you have to put your information out on another platform. You can't. The judicial system is one platform and it's rigged against you. But when you put your information out, like we did, our attorney said, the only way you're going to win is unless you create a blog. Get this information out there. We put that out there, and I get more comments from people say, I wish I would have done the same thing. I mean,
Yeah,
what they
but
did was,
everybody tells you to keep your head down. Everyone says you're
oh,
going to make them mad. Now, I argue
the hell,
that since they're trying to, that since destroying you makes them happy, why would you want to make them happy?
exactly. So these things are terrifying when they go into their offices and they see these videos. They see where they said, well, this guy didn't interview, didn't look at patients, and we have recorded patients. We interviewed every patient and we put it in and we recorded it. And then here's a patient listed on their what they call off their exclusionary thing or whatever that I forget the name right now, but the the administrative thing where this you get this warrant saying we want to cease to desist and stuff. And here they list the name of patients, and here one we have videotape saying, "I never talked to anybody. I need this medication for back pain, or I need for lower back. I was in an accident," and those sort of things. It destroyed their entire argument. We kept putting this stuff in there. Then we would take the administrative hearing docket or the transcript, and we put that in there. Like for the investigator, his name was Richard J. Albert, and they said, "Well, Mr. Albert, in going into Pronto, did you talk with any doctors? No. Did you talk to any patients? No. Do you know the disease and the disease state of any? No, never did that. And it just take his own words and put that into the blog and stuff. So when people saw this, remember now they're going to take you to a jury. They're going to go to. They were going to take you and try you in court. And now it's in this blog. Well, now they've got to try to defend themselves and clean up their act. And then we have the videos of the agents coming in and snatching out our cameras. We're not supposed to do that, snatching our camera. And then the list of stolen property that they were doing, guys, camera equipment that's missing, money that was stolen out of the drawers and stuff like that. And then we hear other cases of people saying, yeah, they came in, I had a baseball card collection, and they stole that, and they stole my wife's jewelry. It came to my house, it raided my house, and tore it up and stuff like that. We started putting that type of information in there. That this organization is a criminal enterprise, and that is a looting operation. It's not raids, these are looting operations. No. And they don't have the authority to dictate the practice of medicine. And we use their own words here. Provenzano's letter to Richard Lawhern, to Dr. Walter Wren, and other folks. We put these letters in there and showed what they said. Well, we don't have the authority to do it. Yet they're doing things outside the law, outside right. Where Congress did not give them authority. And that scared the hell out of those prosecutors. And then we started, as this thing came along, more and more people would call us and say, this is what I have. No one wants to hear our story. And we put this in you are within the norms.com. And that had a dramatic effect on and again, what the government has done is, and the DOJ has done, is they've hidden this from the public. And the other thing that came about was that the media has been of no help too. Josh Bloom talks about this, and he's saying that you've got these folks in the media, they're totally convinced that the doctors at fault, that there's an opioid crisis, and they have drank the Kool-Aid. Then you hear from people like, the Rich Lawhorns, the Jeff Singers, and then yourself. We began to talk about how how media has been shaped by this argument, this false argument of the quote opioid crisis or opioid, right? I like the word opioid pandemic, endemic. Because what we did was my brother says, well, if there's an epidemic, then what you need to do is ask, well, how much bed space in any hospital is being taken up by heart patients, and then high blood pressure patients, and then how many folks beds are being taken up, at that time it's COVID, but also the COVID, how many beds are being taken up by this opioid epidemic patients? Oh, so when we start asking that question, then it's like, oh, what's going on? Because There weren't.
Right.
And
Right.
we're like,
Now, do you think that the recent, now, two quick questions. One,
yes, sir.
they just arrested two big drug dealers that the DEA is telling the media is responsible for all of these fentanyl deaths. So you're going to see in their indictment them blaming 100,000 fentanyl deaths or some such, I haven't got the actual copy, on these two men. At the same time, they're blaming all those deaths on doctors over prescribing. So which is
Well,
it, right?
exactly. Let me make a comment about that. You can't enforce. Here's the other thing that I believe and it's mentioned a lot. Okay, you can't enforce drug laws or so-called illicit drug laws as the DEA's mission to do when you're in bed under the covers with the cartel's prostitutes.
Let me ask you about that. There have been some very high profile arrests recently, proving beyond any doubt
All right.
very high level officials in the DEA have been working with the cartels. Not my words, their own indictments, their own prosecutions, their own guilty pleas, and the evidence that was presented against them.
We look absolutely.
The DEA has been so compromised by, you know how two organizations will start off fighting each other and then end up kind of working together. It happened during the German and British armies during Christmas in World War I.
Exactly.
Happened in World War II with the United States, the OSS, and the mafia, because we needed to smuggle things into Italy to fight with Mussolini. Worked with Lucky Luciano and all that. And then it happened with Whitey Bulger when FBI agents actually helped him target and kill innocent civilian witnesses so that they could protect their asset, their buddy, Whitey Bulger. And now we see that it happening with the DEA. Do you think that it is such a corrupting influence that that the agency is almost unsalvageable at this point?
Absolutely, because here's what we do. We're little guys, we're doing this research and stuff. And as we began to say, well, let's look at this, and then you said, what? Like, for example, we looked at who is this, and this deals with what we call the geopolitical problem that we have here. Remember now, guys like Pablo Escobar, a guy named Roberto he was called the king of cocaine. These guys also were anti-communists. Okay, so what did they do? They worked with the United States to weed out any sort of threat to the U.S. interests in those countries, and this country ignored them. So we ended up after World War II, the Nazis, for example, they were Klaus Barbie was anti-communist. Okay, the British caught him, beat him up. The United States caught him, and said, "Hey, we could use him." Okay, so what did they do? They took Klaus Barbie and they sent him to Argentina, and he's working with the Argentine folks, Perón, and these people, Leopold Galtieri, and you've got the disappeared folks. Okay, another thing we look, and Klaus Barbie is number 43118 on the CIA payroll, but he's also working with Pablo Escobar. He's drug dealing. And then we come across, how does Joseph Mengele end up a drug dealer in Brazil? And he's working with Escobar too. And so we're saying, what's going on here? Then you read Mike Levine's book and talks about the relationship between the Drug Enforcement Agency, these so-called families of the cartels, and the CIA and those sort of things. And then you fast forward to, you find the same players. Okay, then you think about what happened with the Contras and the Iran-Contra affair, and where this was going, and the insurgents. All of this was funded by who funded this? How did these guys get there? Then the Haitian thing comes about. So what we stumbled across is and Jose Isri talks about this. You can't win the war on drugs. He's a DEA guy who got convicted 12 years. He says you can't win the drugs. So we're in it, and his words were simple. The DEA agents knew all the time that the war, this is his quote, war on drugs was unwinnable, and they were going to milk it for all it was worth.
So let me ask you, do
exactly
you think
what
that
you
they form some kind of a truce? And let me give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
The DEA is rated, they often talk about how many tons of this drug and how many tons of that drug they intercept. But the true measure is what percentage of what gets through are they intercepting. So it would be very easy for a cartel to tell the DEA, hey, you did 20 tons last year. We're going to give you 30 tons this year. We're going to tell you where to intercept 30 tons. But whereas we only got 50 tons through last year, we need to get 100 through this year. So you leave us alone. We will tell you where to hit, and your numbers are going to look good. Because here's the problem I have. $2 trillion and a half century after we started the war on drugs, we have a worse problem than we have ever had before. We never had hundreds of thousands dying when heroin was coming across the border.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've got hundreds of thousands dying. They're not even trying to go after the cartels anymore. The DEA said, let's go where the money is and the guns are not. And I think they meant, the medical field,
right.
Physicians. That's clearly what they're doing. They're shutting down, $100 million telemedicine companies on the argument that they didn't do physical exams. I'm not sure how you're supposed to do a physical exam by telemedicine. I don't think we've got that technology yet. So it just seems to me that they are trying to find a way to convince the media and the public that they are effectively fighting the drug war, when I think it seems to me that they've come to a truce. And look what just happened. A plane flew from Mexico to the United States, with two big cartel guys on it.
How does that happen?
Kind of big, but realistically, I think guys they didn't mind giving up.
Exactly. That's exactly how I thought. I said, this doesn't make any sense. There's something else going on here that these guys were worth giving up. And I think it was because of the pressure that we have been putting on them. And this little group here have been putting on them, that they decide, Milgram and these guys decided, well, hey, we better come up with something big so we can come and counter these doctors' argument and those sort of things.
But it can still just be the case that they said, give us some people you don't mind losing, like they did with Whitey Bulger. Because Whitey Bulger informed to the FBI on other organized crime groups that trusted him, got them wiped out, helped wipe out his competition. The FBI got these big busts, but truly they were in bed with organized crime in the form of Whitey Bulger. Do you think this is the same sort of thing where the DEA is? Because I find it extremely extraordinary that any pilot from Mexico would be brave enough to fly these guys and land them in the U.S., knowing that his entire family down to 3 or 4 generations is going to get wiped out.
Right.
It just does not make sense. It seems like they had an okay from somewhere to do that, but maybe not. We'll see how it comes out. But there's no doubt that several recent high-profile arrests have proven a level of criminality.
All right. I think
DEA much worse than any physician ever identified and prosecuted.
Have you ever read the report by there's two things. Have you ever read Ronald Libby's report, 2005, that talks about the Libby report of 2005?
I don't think I have. Let me ask you something for our listeners. Where can they go to find your organization, to contribute to your cause, and to learn more about these things? Where
you go on the internet and go to just type in you are within the norms.com. Okay. You are within the norms.com, and you will see all of this information. There are 800 articles in here.
I
And
will
I
link
think that
that.
there's
I
one,
will link
there's
that
one
in the
other thing.
description. I will link
2000,
to in the description.
right,
So you're
YOUARE within the norms.com. And there's a very interesting report. And I was talking about this Libby report. It says treating doctors as drug dealers, the DEA's war on prescription painkillers, the Ronald Libby report, 2005, June 16th. And this is written by the Cato Institute. And in there, they just outline the phoniness of the of this whole operation, that they knew all the time that this opioid crisis was a fraud. It says in 2001, California doctors found that 40% said fear of investigation affected how they were treating chronic pain. This is 2005. The
right.
DEA would need to find more. The war on
Right now,
drugs.
I believe it would be 90%. I don't know of any doctor that's
Right,
prescribing a single controlled medication, whether it's a psychiatrist prescribing for ADD
right.
or anxiety, a general practitioner, or a pain specialist treating pain. I don't think anyone is not terrified right now. As a matter of fact, the Arkansas State Pain Committee themselves said that they are terrified. And
Mhm.
I will tell you that doctors are terrified to stand up for you in court. They're terrified to testify for you. They're terrified to be an expert witness to you. And I would argue that when experts are terrified to tell the truth in court, our court systems are in trouble. Getting back to
Yes, sir.
the people watching us now, the physicians, healthcare providers, dentists, pharmacists, is there a take-home message that you want to give everyone?
You got to fight, fight, fight. Never give in. Never plead guilty. I would say that and it's going to be a long struggle. For me, I've lost everything. You know, we ran a family business. We were very meticulous about what we were doing, and yet, despite all the records being intact. In fact, I always talk about, we didn't, like most pharmacies, they count stuff by hand. We had a laser device that counted it, called an icon. And despite the accuracy that we had, everything was, they were mad because we put everything on, recorded everything at the moment that it was done. This is not about, and it's not about you having done anything wrong. It's about you being targeted. It's about one being their assets.
So would you agree that once targeted, it is not an investigation, it's more of an inquisition where they've decided what the result will be, and they will restrict your access to evidence that in any way argues against what they want the result to be?
You must be reading my mind. You must have taken those mind reading drugs that we were especially making. No, I'm just kidding. Exactly. All that and more. This is and it's a failure of the Drug Enforcement Agency, because remember, doctors, pharmacists, all of us are easy enforcement targets. When they come to our office, we don't have the AR-15s and M16s and submarines and those sort of things to fight back with. With the drug cartels, when you go after them, you may not come home to have dinner at 5 o'clock.
I think
And
that's
in fact, that's yeah,
what's happening.
that's what
Yeah.
they realize, that we can make more money seizing physicians' assets. It's about asset forward. If you're black here, it's an easy, black or Indian or colored, or you're just an easy target. We can just get those guys out. If you're white and over 50, oh my goodness, that's a feast right there. We're talking about they, first of all, these guys have investments. They put their money, $1 million or so away every year in their retirement account. They belong to the country clubs. They're successful. But
Right.
there's nothing wrong with that. But that's what makes you a target. It makes you, and this is guys and it's easy to corrupt, because these guys will, they don't never had any problems.
Where you believe
Right.
there must have been a mistake and you don't want to accept that there purposefully targeting an innocent person because you want to
Exactly.
believe that they're better than that. And many of them would be. Many of the field agents start off better than that, but I think they
Right.
get weeded out. So by the time you get to a position to make decisions in those agencies, you either have psychopathic tendencies, or you've developed sociopathic tendencies to where you no longer care about others.
And that
Ends
reflects
justify the means.
that sociopathic is very interesting because that reflects all the way to the prosecutors because they want to enhance their career. They want to get up to higher legaldom. They want to sit back like we go to the case of the Ruth Spofford case where you have the prosecutor was winning, and then finally got whooped. And what did she do? She became a federal judge. They wanted to seat on the
That's
federal
another
bench.
problem I have because about 80 to 90% of federal judges are former prosecutors. Very
Exactly.
rarely are they from the defense side. So
Defense side.
I don't think they have a balanced view of the law. Now in Europe, an attorney will be a prosecutor on this case and a defender on that case, and that helps them stay balanced.
Well, you can do the same thing. Well, you can hide all your and administrative law is beautiful at this. Hide all the BS or so, according to this case, that in the mesenchyme of law, so that the truth never gets.
Well, I think that's also confusing to doctors and pharmacists. They think they understand the law because they read something about it, or they're told don't break the law, and they think the law is a clear and evidence-based system, and it clearly is not. It's almost whatever they want to say it is. And even though the Supreme Court clearly said physicians should not go to prison unless they had criminal intent, they are still locking up doctors with absolutely no evidence of criminal intent, and no one is stopping them so far.
And that's a sociopathic part of the whole thing. That and law allows for that. You know, where you and I,
in the manner of a lack of sympathy for the innocent.
Yeah, in medical science, you have to be based upon evidence and fact and science. In courtrooms, it's based upon the same thing: evidence, fact, and that sort of thing. However, there's another thing that's allowed in courtroom. When you don't know the law or you don't know the procedure, you can baffle people with BS, and that is allowed. And so
I would argue that it's emotion-based innuendo that ends up deciding most cases. And
exactly,
without
greedy doctor
that's extraordinarily skilled. I mean, it takes someone. You mentioned Ronald Chapman earlier.
Right.
He's the only one I know of right now that's actually having any success, and he doesn't win all the time. But compared to most attorneys, he's way ahead of the game.
Exactly.
Because he approached it from a position of almost a complete knowledge that he could not trust what he was told by the government. I've read his book. And he said, you can't trust what they tell you. You can't trust the evidence they give you. You have to start with an assumption that they're not telling the truth, that they're hiding evidence. You have to do your own investigation.
Right.
And then you have to expect them to pull what I would consider dirty tricks, but they just call it the game at trial, right? They withhold evidence that could have been incorporated into your defense to the last minute, and then they release it and say, oh, okay, there you go. I'll give you an example. If a witness is going from the grand jury is going to testify at trial, they have to give you that person's transcript, but not until that person starts testifying. So there you are trying to scan through a 100-page document. It's completely corrupt. Now, I would also argue that federal civil trials are much, much more fair than federal criminal trials, because in civil trials, you can't hide anything. Neither side can hide anything from the other. You can depose witnesses. You can see all the evidence, because whoever thought that a prosecutor should be trusted with deciding what is and is not exculpatory or helpful to the defense, I think that is the flaw in our system. I think that is the flaw.
Right.
But we'll leave it at that. I'm going to put links to your site and to some of these studies in the description. And
You're within the norms.com.
you're within the norms.com, and I want to thank you for your advocacy. To those who have been
Thank you.
targeted, I want to let you know that you are a great source of comfort, because just knowing that someone understands what you're going through gives you a sense of peace. You know, fighting the federal government is always a Pyrrhic victory. Even when you win, as you did, as Dr. Rafai has, it's like fighting a shark. They're
Right.
still going to take maybe one leg and half an arm if you're lucky. And so the opportunity for justice, I would argue, is before an innocent citizen is indicted. After that, it's
Yes.
only injustice, and the question is how much. Would you agree?
Right. Oh, absolutely. You got to fight, fight, and stay fighting, and never give in, never give up. As I said, we go in there and we just redefine their nomenclature and rearrange their take names, but we'll leave it alone. But we'll say we fight and we never give up, and that's what's kept me going, because the truth will come out and stuff. And I really appreciate this forum that you've had, particularly the videos that have come out, and people get an understanding that I wouldn't call us the other side, but understanding of the truth. That we let them argue with our policy is they want to argue with us, but we let them argue with the science, let them argue with the literature, and we will prevail. And again, I thank you so much, Doctor. I call you General L. Parker.
I was only a captain. Thank you very much.
But the work that you've done here has been fabulous in terms of helping medical science through this medical legal issue, and as we said, the conflict between medicine and that of law.
Thank you so much, sir. And
Thank you.
That's a great ending message. You have a great day, sir, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, and thank you. You have a good day too.